What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Wade Watches. I'm Wade, and today I'm going to be reviewing The Creator, directed by Gareth Edwards and starring John David Washington. So, when I was going to the movies to see this, the thought that kept going through my head, like the one thing that I just couldn't shake, was the fact that this really did look like something that Neil Blomkamp of District 9, Elysium, and Chappie fame would direct. It just had his aesthetic all over it. It just had that, it just looked like another uh, brutal sci-fi dystopian movie that would have very explicit social commentary, but using familiar science fiction tropes like such as extraterrestrials and robots. Though there are no aliens in this movie, it's all about robots. But that was what was going through my head, and having seen it a couple of days ago, I still kind of stand by that, but that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's like it just feels like a ripoff of District 9 or Elysium. That's actually more or less of a compliment. It actually means that it gave me what I wanted, because Neil Blomkamp has delivered, in my opinion at least, two of the best original science fiction stories in cinema of the 21st century as a whole. District 9 and Elysium are some of my favorite all time favorite movies, and in my opinion, if we're talking about science fiction movies that aren't remakes, sequels, reboots, retellings of another a pre-existing story, yeah, they're up there, and they're some of my all time favorite movies. Now, The Creator is not that great because it does show its influences pretty explicitly, like movies that the creator takes inspiration from. It's the movie's just not at all really subtle about it. I said this in my out of theater reaction, but like I said, it all boils down to execution, and in my opinion, it's executed fine, but it's not without its problems. Main One of the biggest problems with The Creator is that I don't want to give away anything, as always, but I would say that what you think that the movie will be about, what you that kind of big this big deal, this one central aspect, this one integral plot point that's a really big deal in the context of the universe that this movie takes place in. You think that the movie would fully be about that. However, it's more or less a quest for something entirely different. But that main aspect, that main thing, that central plot point that you think it's going to be about, does eventually come into play, I'd say, later on. But for the majority of it, this movie focuses on something completely different. So, without giving away much, there's a kind of a bait and switch thing going on here. But again, it wasn't a terrible thing, and it's a very understandable. It's justified in the movie. It's a very understandable plot point. It's a very understandable quest. I totally get it, but in the grand scheme of things, I personally didn't find it the most engaging of plots. Like, of all the things that they could have picked to focus on, instead of focusing on what you think is going to be the central focus of this movie, okay, I guess. I mean, okay, I could I it's very It's a very emotional thing. It's a very personal thing. Like District 9 and Elysium, this is a more personal story than you think. It's not this big, giant, epic spectacle with like all these different subplots and plot lines that all converge together. It's not like something like Star Wars or Dune or Star Trek. This is a very, very personal, individualistic story, but I just didn't find it the most intriguing, and I do frankly wish that more focus would have been lent to what what this movie is kind of selling itself on, more or less. And that's all I'll say. But you know what? If you want to tell this story, at least it wasn't like complete trash. John David Washington is a really good actor. He has some very powerful scenes in this movie. He gives out a good performance. He has a good relationship with you've seen this in all the marketing. This kid that he eventually stumbles upon. They're cute together when they're on screen. They have that kind of generic chemistry, that little back and forth banter, like, oh kid, I don't like you, you're annoying, but eventually as it goes on, you're all right, kid. You've seen it a bajillion times before, and I won't say it really exceeds that or surpasses that or does anything you haven't seen. The only reason as to why it's different than anything special is because it just so happens to be set in the backdrop of science fiction, of a dystopian science fiction tale. And speaking of original sci-fi stories that aren't based on anything pre-existing, the world itself that the creator set in is a pretty interesting one. It's another Robocalypse story where AI got too intelligent, and you could guess what they tried to do, but it slightly subverts that. It's not just this generic Terminator humans versus robots war. It does something different with it, and in regards to world building and the actual universe, it was actually pretty intriguing and engaging. They do something very unique with the robots and the artificial intelligence in this movie that I wasn't expecting. And the few moments where, because I like how that this movie isn't like just a straight up exposition jump, like let's explain this, let's explain that, let's explain everything. It follows the principle of show don't tell when it does choose to unfold more information about this universe that it's set in. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed learning more about this alternate version of reality. So that was also a very enjoyable thing as well. But other than that, other than the things I just mentioned, the creator doesn't really stand out to me as much as, an original sci fi story like District 9 or Elysium. And yes, sorry, I'm going to keep comparing it to those two because this really does look like something that Neil Blomkamp directed, but it was directed by Gareth Edwards. Him and a couple of other writers came up with his original story. And they've even admitted that they were inspired by a variety of different sci-fi movies and stories, which is all right. There's no crime in being sci-fi. There's no crime in being inspired by pre-existing source material. None whatsoever. And like I said, at the end of the day, I did enjoy watching the creator, and as a matter of fact, I do have plans to go see it again in IMAX because I now want to see this movie on the biggest screen possible. I feel like it's just one of those movies that is made for the big screen, and I'm sure I'll enjoy the visuals and the actually well put together CGI for this movie. So yeah, I can't give it the highest of praises. I can't say that it broke the mold for me, that it's one of the greatest sci-fi movies I've seen in recent years. But that doesn't mean that I did not have a blast with the creator. That does not mean that I didn't derive any enjoyment from it. This was a very engaging and entertaining movie, and hell, even slightly thought-provoking in some parts. Um, Original science fiction story. Um, and I will also say that unfortunately, for a movie that definitely tries to pull your heartstrings, because like I said, this is a very personal story. Once you begin to realize what this movie is truly about. Um, I mean, I have a heart, so I was kind of like, oh, oh no, when certain things went down, but it didn't fully succeed in like emotionally attaching me to this story. It definitely tries to tug at your heartstrings and have an emotional message and a couple of emotional scenes with different characters. It just didn't fully work for me. So wrapping it up, I'm going to give the creator a 7 out of 10. Wish I could go a bit higher. Wish I could, give it 8 or 10 or above because hey, an original fucking sci-fi movie coming out in 2023, a year where everything's been a pretty much everything so far has been a sequel, a remake, a reboot, etc. It's like a breath of fresh air, but unfortunately it just wasn't that exceptional. But I still had a hell of a time with it. I still had a really fun time watching this movie, and there were moments where it was somewhat engaging. So and you know what, 7 is still pretty high. So yes, the creator gets a 7 out of 10 from me. This has been another edition of Wade Watches, and I'll see you all next time. Peace.